At the pre-seed stage, investors are underwriting the founder, not the business. See, most founders spend 80-90% of their time on product. When investors have that flipped in the early stages of investing, they focus on you as a founder. Today, I want to break down why investors bet on you before your product, especially in the early stage. What's up, founders? Welcome back, investors, to Next Round Ready. I'm your host, Chris. Today, we're going to get into what exactly this investment process looks like in the early stage. And this is where a lot of investors work. There are fewer funds the higher you go in the investment stage process. Like in pre-seed, I think that's where I see most of the funds, and in its seed for sure. When you get to Series A, Series B, that's where it's less fun because it takes more money. That's when companies are bigger. It's harder to buy in. So it's a lot of funds that really work all over the place in that early pre-seed and seed area. So really, first thing you got to understand, investors decide in the first 90 seconds. They're talking to you as a founder, and they have this bias that it's hard for them to get past. And I've asked every investor about this, and they say that it's just part of the process, right? They see patterns. And I mean, think about it. If you spent a ton of your time talking to founders, don't you think you would have a good pattern recognition process set up mentally for when you see a good founder versus a bad founder? So I don't really fault the investors for making certain choices or judgments so fast because, again, you do this all the time. I look at so many companies, I'm now getting to that point, right? Like when I do my fundability calls with, students from universities or different accelerators, I start to see these patterns in certain founders who I believe are going to be successful. And then I compare that to the successful founders that I do interview on the show who have built successful big companies, who have raised multiple rounds, some who've had exits, all of that stuff. So then you kind of can compare when you're around the founders who are starting out versus these successful founders. You really get a nice sample size on both sides, and then you can compare, and then you realize like, there are some things that this early stage founder must have if they want to be that exited founder. If you're fundraising right now or plan on fundraising for your startup within the next 6 months, you got to do one thing. You got to take the fundability assessment on Compass. That's compass.nextroundready.vc. I build Compass based on the same criteria that I hear and I learn from investors every single week. It scores you across 5 different pillars and tells you exactly what real investors are looking at when they see your company. It takes 10 minutes and it's completely free. And once you're done, you immediately get investors delivered directly to your inbox. Complete your assessment now at compass.nextroundready.vc. Another misconception is this thing about domain expertise. This is the thing. Domain expertise is important, but it's more so about domain obsession because that does 2 things. It shows the investor that you have this interest in the space and you're dedicated and focusing on this one area. But it also shows that you're focused on learning that. See, if you come to them as an expert, sometimes you have this ego that you know it all. And that's one major red flag I heard from, I think Steve Walsh was one of the first investors that really drove that home a few months ago. And I talked to him. He's like, I hate when founders think they know everything. It's just hard because you're not coachable, right? It makes a ton of sense. So sometimes being an expert can kind of backfire on you. And you probably won't even realize it as a founder. It's something that could happen to you and you won't recognize that it happened until later. You're like, man, I was really being full of myself. I was being kind of an a-hole, if you want to put it out there, right? Because that's what the expertise turns us into sometimes. Especially, look at it this way. If you're talking to an investor and they don't know a lot about your industry or your space, if you talk to them from this, like you're looking down on them on a ledge kind of perspective, that comes off to them like, oh, this guy think he knows too much or she has too much of an ego. Whereas if you come at this from an obsessed perspective, you might come off as if you're teaching them or explaining things. And I think the main way to know which one you're doing is how are you explaining this, right? I always try to take this perspective, like that old saying, teach it to me like I'm 12. That's how I try to break things down, and not in a condescending, you're not smarter than me kind of way. It's like we become experts or obsessed about something, and then we start to learn everything we can. So at a certain point, you learn more than the basics. So when somebody asks you a question, you can go to level 10 in answering that question, right? But you don't always have to. It's best sometimes to stay at level 1 or 2 so they can understand you. If you go to level 10, that comes off to the investor as if you're being snobby. that's where the expertise can backfire because you sound like you're just stroking your own ego. And another way that these investors bet on you is, like I said a little bit earlier, your coachability. You need to be the kind of founder that can take that insight. And I think a lot of founders struggle with this one because it's like, well, how do I prove I'm coachable? I'm going to give you an example of how you can prove you're coachable. I used to do this. I've played for so many different coaches at the high school level, college, even a little bit pro, right? And the funny thing is, coaches sometimes have that energy of you have to listen to me. It's my way or there's no way. And you as a player have to learn how to not try to fight that because it's not a battle you're going to win, right? So it's better to take a step back and acknowledge what they're saying and address it. Understand what they're saying. Even if you disagree, this is where it's hard. Even if you disagree, if you know for a fact they're wrong, you let it play out, right? I think that's just always works better. When I talk to people who are in positions of power, I don't try to tell them that they're wrong or embarrass them. And if I do, it is more subtle. But sometimes letting things play out and let them see that they're wrong, that's how you can win. And so some investors will try to talk down to you as a founder. I don't think you should let that happen. But don't come off as somebody that's not coachable where they say jump and you're like, well, why am I jumping? Why I do this? Why I got to do that? Don't be that kind of founder. That's not who they want to work with. And also, I think you can't operate from a scarcity perspective. So if you do have a hard disagree, just explain it. This really goes into like how you explain your disagreements. How do you deal with that? Because if you can be calm and direct while still being, let's call it polite, you're going to win. You'll be fine. But if you take it to level 10 and you're always talking down at people, you're yelling and things like that, or if you say you're going to do what they told you to do and then you do something completely opposite, that's not going to work. And you just want to avoid that. And this is really important in that pitch phase early on when you're talking to investors to stand on what you believe and what you know to be true, but still leave room for their input and their insight, their advice, because it could be helpful. Just remember, you don't know everything. And once you remember that, it's always easier to take a step back and calm down. Like, okay, they could be right. And you just let it go and let them coach you up, because some investors, even if they don't know what they're talking about, like it makes them feel good. So let them, even if you are already going to do the thing they're telling you to do, let them coach you on that. Just let them go and you'll be just fine. Another thing that you have to get past as a founder is this idea that your pedigree is this thing that's going to save you. Like, will it help you? Yes, but it's also a trap. Because there are some founders who might have come from a certain school or they worked at a certain company and now they have this belief that, well, I went here and I worked there, so this is going to be easy for me. I can do whatever I want. And in a way you can, because there are some investors that are going to follow you around because you're ex Amazon, ex Google, ex this, ex that. There are some investors that will chase you because you're a graduate from Stanford or Harvard, MIT, whatever. But the truth is, if you want to be consistent and really get better results, you can't lean on that. That can't be your identity. It's cool that you did it. Great. But it can't be the first thing out your mouth. You can't paint it as this is why I should be the one to build this company right now and why you need to fund it. That's not a good enough answer. Like at all. I actually know a couple investors that will run away from that. Honestly, I just interviewed Andrew Beatty. And Andrew literally told me that one thing he doesn't really pursue are the founders who come from corporate backgrounds, even if it's from these bigger companies, because sometimes those founders are just not the best founders. Now they think they are because of where they come from. It's up here. The same with the school part, but that's not always the case. So just don't let that be a trap for you that gets you stuck in like a fake identity that really doesn't serve you. So those are just a few ways that investors really dial in on you as an individual. I think you as a founder have to be 100% prepared for these conversations and just always keep in mind that in the early stages, when you don't have a ton of traction, the company isn't massive, there aren't a bunch of sales numbers and all of that stuff. They're looking at you as an individual person, and don't be nervous about it. Don't overthink it. Don't panic. Just be yourself. But if you as your true self is not coachable, that's something you got to fix. Because if they're giving you millions of dollars or hundreds of thousands of dollars, they're going to want to coach you at some point, or they're bringing somebody else who is. You can't ruin a relationship because you don't know how to listen to somebody else. So those are just a few things to keep in mind. Make sure you check out the free fundability assessment. If you are trying to raise capital, this is a tool you need. Check out compass.nextroundready.vc. I'm Chris. I'll see you next time.